Okay, guys, good afternoon. Welcome back to class. Hopefully everyone's doing really well and having a good week so far. Just got about 8 minutes and then it'll be our 1 p.m. class time. So until then, just relax and kind of get ready and I'll be right with you guys. As usual, I just kind of like to set up the stream a few minutes early. But no need to do anything just yet. A few minutes to go. Hi, Chelsea. Hi, Margarito. Good to see you guys. Hi, Danny. Good to see you. Peachy. She's over there. Eddie. Cats are playing off camera. Hi, John. Good to see you there. Hi, Brenda. Good afternoon. Hi, Tahani. Hello. I guess we got a long weekend coming up. That's kind of nice. Get a little extra time back. I think that's the only holiday pretty much of the term except for the spring break. So really soak in the extra hours of sleep, I guess. Hey, Noah. Good to see you too. Hey, Dimitri. Hi, Yvonne. Everybody else, good to see everyone. Hey, Nick, how's it going? Peachy. Good girl, Peach. She's just such a floppy, just really good kitty. About 3 minutes, everybody. Just kind of reminding you guys. Still got some time though. Hi, Nayeli. Hey, Danny. Hi, Vanessa. Hi, Dylan. And hi, Diane. Good to see you there. Yeah, sometimes she talks. Her brother is more shy, well, to the camera, but he talks more when it's just me around the house. Hi, everyone. Hi, Cecilia, Jennifer, Nancy, Edward. Appreciate you guys' attendance. Eddie, want to say hi? Come on, Eddie. Camera shy. All right, guys, just a little bit, just a moment here, another minute or so. The day so far has been pretty good. I had a couple of earlier class meetings this morning, so pretty much almost done after I'm finished with you guys. I just have one more. Looking forward to getting in a run, I guess, later this afternoon. The sun is out, so that's nice. Hi, Micah and Blake and everybody. Yeah, it's Wednesday. It's hump day. I always feel good once we get through that middle of the week kind of part, so everything seems pretty chill after today. Hey, Mick. Hi, Derek. Amanda, Gladys, Emily. Great to see you guys. And hi, Alexa. Good to see you too. All right, everyone. Let's go ahead and just get back into the lectures. And welcome everyone back that's here at the meeting. I see you guys in the chat. So thank you for being here. Now, just as usual, please, if you haven't already, just go ahead and type in some kind of comment. And that'll be my kind of informal attendance record, as you know. So anyway, guys, thanks. Let's just get back to our material. One thing I want to mention first of all is today, as you know, is the due date for the first homework assignment. So if you haven't already sent it to me, just make sure that you do it right away, because it'll receive a little late credit deduction if it comes to me, later. So official due date and time is today before the 1 p.m. But if you get it to me before the end of class, it's probably going to be fine. At the same time, just make sure that I have received it. Now, to everybody that sent me their homework, I've been sending back a confirmation of receipt through email to people. But the ones that I've received this morning, I maybe haven't had a chance yet to go back to my inbox. So I think I'm all current as of like maybe 9 or 10 a.m. this morning. But if you've submitted beyond that, then don't worry. I'll be replying to your email later this afternoon when I'm done at 3:45. Okay, now look, if there's any kind of issue with your delivery, then you would know it because you would not receive a confirmation email from me, because I'm responding to 100% of the submissions that I do receive. So I figured you haven't had any issues sending me something, but if you didn't get a reply by the end of, like 3:45 or 4 o'clock, you might want to double check, make sure you didn't have any spelling errors or anything else with the URL, with the email address. Okay, so anyway, we're moving on from the first homework. I'm going to grade it right away, and I'll have it finished up this weekend. I know we have a holiday on Monday, but I'm going to mail the answer key for the first homework sometime before next Wednesday, probably this weekend or so, maybe on Sunday night. I'll mail you the answer key. I'm just going to give people a couple more days if there's late submissions. I don't want to mail out the answer key too early because then it would make the late submissions completely invalid in terms of having no credit I could give to them. So at least I can give some deducted credit if I haven't released the answers quite yet. Therefore, anyway, I'm going to give those answers out as an answer key in titanium over the weekend, and then we look forward to next Wednesday's meeting, which is going to be the first quiz of the class. So just a couple of things coming up. Your first homework due today, answer key being mailed out over the weekend, Monday's a school holiday, and then Wednesday next week we'll have a quiz. I'll follow up with you guys in another message that gives you all kinds of clear details about the way we are doing our quiz, but it's nothing too strange. You're just going to receive the file which has the quiz in it, and then you just have to send back your answers to me before the expiration of the class time period. Okay, guys, so just a few points to mention as we start the meeting. From there, I want us to really get back into the notes on Chapter 1. We have a bit more to cover there, so let's just try and jump right back in. We started our summary of Chapter 1 by talking about some of those famous social psychology experiments that kind of give a sense of the value and the importance of being a good critical thinker. One of them was the Milgram study. That was the one that was supervised and conducted by Stanley Milgram at Yale University in the early 1960s. And in that scientific experiment, we basically were trying to study how far will people go following the directives of an authority figure, even if the authority figure is telling them to do things that are clearly contrary to what morality and common sense would tell you that you should do. It's not long after the era of Nazi Germany, and so some people were wondering, how innate is this tendency to just follow orders that people give you, even when the orders are morally compromised and unjust? So in the study, they had the subjects divided into the role of teacher and learner. The learner had to memorize word pairs. They told the teacher, read off the first member of the pair, give them options as to what the correct counterpart of the pair would be. If they give the wrong answer there, give them a little electrical shock on this voltage scale. Each new wrong answer upped the intensity of the shock. And basically, there were no real shocks. So that was all just a ruse. That was a deception being played on the part of the teacher who thought the shocks were real. At a certain point in the process, the learner would be screaming out and hollering out in pain and agony and just demanding to be let go. And the researcher would keep commanding the teacher that they had to continue with the shocks. So what we're really looking at is how far are people going to go following these orders, and how many of them will break away, at what point will they break away, etc. What it showed was kind of disappointing that 2/3 of people gave all the shocks, even though many of them showed that they were a little uncomfortable doing it. At the end of the day, fully 2/3 of the people did it just because they were being commanded to do it by someone that they thought was an authority figure in charge, this researcher. But there was a healthy minority contingent of about 35% of people that didn't give all the shocks, that refused at some point in the process. And you can see this on the video footage that I'm still going to share for you guys in a message I'll send later today. But in the video footage, you can tell that the people who were able to refuse were able to give competent reasons and like logical arguments as to why it was wrong, unlike those that just mindlessly followed along. So being a good critical thinker helps you have those tools that you need to intellectually resist authority when it's right and proper, to make judgments on your own, analysis of a situation, and not just to mindlessly follow along and do something wrong. And then there was the Zimbardo study. That was given by Philip Zimbardo. It's sometimes called the famous Stanford prison experiment. In the basement of Stanford psychology department in 1971, he recruited student volunteers from college-age student volunteers to divide into the roles of prisoner and guard. And it was supposed to be a simulated prison for 2 weeks. After 6 days, it was canceled early because it was becoming increasingly traumatic and abusive. And so again, it's kind of a reminder that many, if not all of us, do have just sort of innate tendencies to act badly, to behave badly and to do bad things if we think we have social support for the behavior, and if we're given loose oversight and a role to play. So being a good critical thinker helps to counteract these dangerous and unhelpful tendencies that we do have. Okay, so after that, we talked about the 3 stages of cognitive development, and we mentioned that this was described by William Perry Jr., an education researcher. The first stage is dualism, where you think truth is all black and white and authority figures know everything, so you should just listen to them and not question it. The second stage is relativism, where now you think there's actually no objective truth and it's all just opinion-based, so we should treat all the opinions equally. And then finally, commitment, the third level. At the commitment level, you do think there's objective truth, and it's not just all relative. But unlike the dualist, you believe that you are a competent judge who can discover what these facts and truths are by committing to them based on reason and the best available evidence. That would be the highest level of cognitive development, which is the lifelong process of acquiring intelligence and problem-solving abilities. Okay, and then just bringing you guys back up to speed from where we left off. We started talking about qualities of a good critical thinker, and that's where we're going to resume right now. So we were in the middle of that discussion. Qualities or characteristics of a good critical thinker. These are the kind of qualities that we want to have or develop on our journey to becoming those better critical thinkers ourselves. So we already talked about analytical skills, ability to provide logical support for your views, effective communication, listening, speaking, writing effectively, and also knowing about different communication styles, research and inquiry skills. Now we move to the next, which is flexibility. When we mention it here in this book and in this class, we're talking about flexibility in the not in the physical sense, like a person that's really good at yoga, although I mean that's also a great thing, but rather we're talking about intellectual, mental flexibility. So what that involves is the ability to change your mind or change your plans when it's called for. So the ability to change one's mind or plans, and also being open-minded to alternative ideas, to other people's ideas. So I'll move peachy, don't worry, but I'm just writing the definition for a moment. The ability to change one's mind or plans. Okay, so if you have the quality of flexibility, flexibility of mind, then that means that you're willing and able to change course, to course correct, to go to plan B, as it were, when something's not working out the way that you would like. A person who doesn't have this kind of flexibility is the sort of person who just keeps doubling down on a failed course of action and kind of stubbornly refuses to reconsider or to adjust. Okay, so if you're flexible in your way of thinking, then you have plans and you have ideas, but when they show their failure or they show their limits, you're willing and you're able to do something different. Okay, so you got to have that kind of flexibility in your mind and in your way of thinking. Otherwise, you kind of get bogged down in dead-end behavior that's not going to get to the results that you want. So you have to have that ability to change your mind and plans. And the last part is being open to other alternative ideas. Like, don't just immediately dismiss ideas that you don't initially agree with. At least hear people out, be willing to understand where they're coming from and what their reasons are. You're going to get more out of the exchange with other people. You're going to learn where they're coming from, and you might even, in some cases, change your mind. So you don't want to be so inflexible that you stubbornly refuse to ever change your opinions or your plans and projects. So flexibility, and yet another quality of a good critical thinker. And I'm just going to keep on building up these notes and the vocabulary in this part of chapter 1. The next thing that's mentioned here is an interesting quality, which is called open-minded skepticism. Okay, open-minded skepticism is a quality that involves two basic factors. One, if you're the open-minded skeptic, kind of like with how we opened the whole class, that means you're the kind of person who would not believe something unless it could be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. So you'll believe things, but only if there's really solid proof that can demonstrate that it is true. So not believing things unless they can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Um, but so that's the skeptical part. You know, you're too skeptical to just believe things that you hear unless it's backed by really good proof. But there's also the open-minded element. So that part of the definition is, but you still keep an open mind. Sorry, there's like a fire truck outside passing by. Not believing things unless they can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, but keeping an open mind to all ideas until this has been proven. So okay, so on the one hand, the open-minded skeptic is the kind of person that says, you have to prove it to me. I can't just accept it without reasonable proof. So you're not going to be able to just make an unverified, unsourced claim to a person that's this kind of skeptic. They're going to say, I'm not sure. You can't really prove it. At the same time, though, the open-minded skeptic keeps an open mind until such proof arrives, if it ever does. So if you're an open-minded skeptic and somebody says, like, hey, aliens exist, what do you think? They'd be like, well, I don't know. I mean, maybe they do, but I'm a little skeptical unless I get better proof. We need better hard evidence of that. Nonetheless, I'm not going to rule it out. I'll keep an open mind to that. But until better proof arrives, it's sort of like the jury is out. I'm not going to judge whether I believe or not unless I have absolute or at least credible proof. So, you know, a lot of people in life, they believe things too easily without very good reasons or proof. Maybe it's just something that they hope is true or that they wish was true. So they attach to that belief and want it to happen or want it to be the case. But you have to be skeptical by nature. You have to be the kind of person who insists and demands on evidence and reason. At the same time, though, you don't want to foreclose any possible perspectives. You don't want to say, I'm ruling stuff out with no proof. So you keep an open mind. You don't say that you're committed to either of the views. But unless there's proof there, you're going to remain uncommitted. Okay, so that's open-minded skepticism. Now, in discussions of skepticism, there's a famous philosopher that's often mentioned. And so let me kind of talk about him a bit because he's also mentioned in our book. It's this man, René Descartes. He's perhaps one of the most famous writers in philosophy on the topic of skepticism and all that, like doubting stuff, what basis there is to doubt things. Now, in his, so he lived from 1596 to 1650. This is a French philosopher of the early modern period. So he lived in Paris, and he wrote a famous book called The Meditations. The full title is Meditations on First Philosophy, but often it's just academically shorthand, The Meditations of Descartes. And in the Meditations, he says, if you really want to try and figure out what is certain, and he thinks it's actually very important to establish what is certain because he thinks that science and everything is founded on certainty. And so we got to first establish a baseline of certainty before we can build up all these other pieces of knowledge that are founded on that. In order to discover what's certainty, he suggests what he calls a method of doubt. So let me tell you about his famous method of doubt. And this is what he talks a lot about this so-called method in his famous book called The Meditations. The Meditations were published in 1641, by the way, originally in Latin and then later in English and French. But okay, the method of doubt, his famous kind of legacy item that he left behind, is this idea. To assume to be false anything and everything that could even possibly be false. Okay? Okay, so Descartes says, one way of determining what is totally certain is to utilize this method. And the method, again, it says, just suppose for the sake of argument that if something can be doubted, then it is false. So in other words, if it's even possible to doubt something, that doesn't mean that it's likely to be false or whatever, but even if it's like 1% or less than 1% chance that it's false, even if there's this tiny, tiny little chance that you're wrong, just go ahead and then assume that that is totally false and continue on with this same method until you find something that can't be doubted at all. Kind of like a process of elimination, I guess. You're inspecting your beliefs and you're looking at each one and you're determining, is this something that has any potential to be false? And if it is, then you'd set it to the side, designate it as false, and then continue on throughout the rest of your belief system until you find something you can hold on to that's not doubtful at all. Now, Descartes' method of doubt from his book, The Meditations, it's a famous concept, and it's important to be a little skeptical by nature, to have a healthy dose of doubt instead of just to be overly gullible and credulous about everything that you hear or read. At the same time, though, we probably wouldn't go quite as far to the extremes of doubt as Descartes does, because this method of doubt is pretty intense. I mean, for example, there are some things that probably you feel like right now you absolutely don't doubt at all. But according to Descartes' method of doubt, you don't really know these things for sure. Like, for example, right now I'm sure you believe that you're watching a YouTube lecture, like from your home or wherever you're at. What do you think would have to be, is it possible for you to be wrong that you're currently watching a lecture on YouTube? What way could that possibly be false? How could you just be mistaken about your belief that you have now, that you're watching this lecture at your house? Well, Dylan, you're saying no, you couldn't doubt it. But unfortunately, Descartes won't let you have that. He says there is a reason to doubt this. But I'm going to ask you guys to really dig around in your mind and figure out what the reason could be. What possible reason could there be for you to be wrong about your current situation? Okay, so you're saying if you're multitasking, this isn't getting far enough outside the box, though, Noah. But I'll get to you in a minute. Maybe if someone is watching something else on a different screen, that's also not far out enough. Dylan, you're getting there. False reality, yeah. So look at your body that you have, like your hands and stuff. What if I told you that you don't know for sure that you even have a body? What would have to be the case for you to be completely wrong just about everything, about the whole existence of the external reality, even about your own physical body? All those things could be false if what was happening right now. Just go there. Like, what kind of situation would you have to be in right now for everything around you to be a big illusion? If what? Dylan, you put it as false reality, kind of. Diego, you say live in a simulation. Yeah? Okay, good. Now, let's think back, though, to the time he lived. He's living back in 1596 to 1650, so they didn't have computers or simulated, versions of VR and stuff. What do you think would have been his example to make the same point? Writing in 1641 with a quill, what do you think he might have said could have been the possible cause of just wholesale wrong error about the reality around you? It's close to that, though, Diego. Well, I wasn't going to say dead, because being dead, you wouldn't even have a consciousness. But yes, dreaming. That's right, John. So he says, when you've had dreams in your life at different times, when you're in the dream, you think it's really happening. You're not in the dream usually like, hey, it's a dream, so this isn't real. You have realistic dreams. Speaking for myself, I have those all the time. A lot of times they're a little disturbing because bad things happen in the dream, like I'm facing my death or whatever, and I wake up like, yes, this is just fake, it wasn't real. Okay, so suppose that the reality that you think you're in now is actually a big dream. And so if you're sleeping right now, then everything you think is happening might not really be happening. Okay, now look, we're not going to press doubt to those far extremes. None of us have to walk around wondering, is this reality a big illusion? Is this like a computer simulation or a dream? But the method of doubt just reminds us that there's a lot of room for doubt, even about very fundamental things that you would ordinarily just take for granted. So within reasonable limits, not going to the far extremes of doubting whether or not the external reality exists or whether other people exist, but just doubting, common questions and beliefs that people have is a good standpoint to take. That's what Descartes argues for. If you ever read his Meditations and you take a full philosophy class on it, it's quite fascinating. By the time he finishes his book, he does take a big, long, winding circle back to everyday common sense. And so at the end of his book, he's like, now I think I have convinced myself that the reality does exist and that there's other minds and that, things appear as they really are. But he doesn't help himself to those things. He tries to prove it, he believes, through a very point-by-point argument. Okay, so anyway, I was just revealing to you guys different qualities of good critical thinkers, and that took us into a slight digression about the work of Descartes, which is mentioned in the book. He's mentioned usually in conversations about the idea of skepticism. So when I said open-minded skepticism, don't believe things unless it can really be proven. but still keep an open mind. Descartes is referred to right after that in the book to kind of back that lesson with an example of a figure who wrote about skepticism. Okay, and so his major contribution to the academy and to the, the world was his Meditations book, which talked about the method of doubt, and now we've talked about it. Okay, but it is a weird thought, right? I mean, you'd say, no, it's not an illusion because it's just too vivid and clear. But if the whole thing has been an illusion, then there's nothing that you could compare it with, right? So I guess that's something that, if you think about it, you couldn't absolutely rule it out. It's also the subject matter of a lot of science fiction films. It was all a dream kind of plot point, or it was all a simulation, like The Matrix or Inception or something like that. Okay, so let's go back into the list and continue from there. We just have a few more qualities of a good critical thinker that the textbook refers to. The next one was creative problem solving. Okay, now that just means the ability to come up with creative solutions to complex problems. Okay. Okay, so creative problem solving. Good critical thinkers, among the other talents and skills they have, are good at solving problems. Problems arise all the time. It'd be great if everything in life was uncomplicated and unproblematic. You never get a flat tire, you never run out of gas, you never got into a sticky situation that you're looking to get out of. These things do happen, though, and so when they happen, everyone looks to the good critical thinkers who are rational, calm, and careful to consider all of the factors that are relevant in terms of solving the given problem. So if you're a good creative problem solver, one thing you can do is sometimes being the problem solver involves coming up with contingency plans in advance, thinking in advance of what could go wrong so that you're already ready in case that possible outcome happens, right? So a good critical thinker would have already anticipated in the advance before taking a long road trip that maybe the car could break down, or maybe I could have some type of other issue along the road or along the route. So they plan in advance for possible problems. It's not the first time they've thought about what to do when the problem actually happens. They've already considered the possibility before and are ready with some kind of plan B to kick in. On the other hand, sometimes problems arise that are so difficult to predict or so spontaneous and random that you can't have had an advanced plan ready. And in that case, a good creative problem solver, a good critical thinker, can make quick decisions about what's necessary and how best to execute the solution. So you want to be a good problem solver, not only because you face problems in life, but sometimes it's a marketable skill. Businesses, companies, firms, they value people that are good problem solvers to solve the problems they may have in their business or in general. So there's some examples in the book of when creative problem solving wasn't seen, and it kind of underscores some of the dangers of being not so good at advanced planning and also just on-the-fly solution making. They talked, for one, about the nuclear reactor meltdown in the Fukushima nuclear reactor in Japan. That happened about 10 years ago, I think, because there was a big tsunami wave that occurred due to an earthquake nearby. And so the height of the waves basically breached the walls of the nuclear reactor facility. It caused a meltdown, and now there's like a 50-mile uninhabitable zone all around there where only robots can really be sent because of the existence of all the radiation is dangerous for people. It takes so long to dissipate. Now, they mention it in the book because Japan is known as a part of the world where tsunami waves due to earthquake have happened throughout history. There's a lot of very impressive historical art pieces from the region which show exactly that kind of scene playing out on the woodblock print. So it wouldn't have been impossible to foresee this as an outcome, and if better contingency planning had been made in advance, then maybe they would have fortified the structure in the right way, or just chose to build it in a different location, or what have you. So that's one example. Another one mentioned in the book there was the Hurricane Katrina disaster in the US back in 2005. So there were a lot of public policy and engineering papers leading up to that event saying that the levees that were holding water back were becoming weak and needed to be refurbished and strengthened. So it was actually foreseeable that in the event of like a significant weather event like a hurricane, that the levees could break down and cause massive flooding. And of course, that's exactly what happened. So sometimes the information is there, people don't act on it. In other cases, people don't develop the proper planning in advance in the first place. You know, we can see that again, even with the coronavirus outbreak in the United States and how bad it has been here. The lessons that we've learned from that, we can hopefully apply to the future. But if you're a good creative problem solver, then at least on an individual level, you'll manage problems and find solutions better than those that aren't this way. Okay, now the last quality of a good critical thinker that I'll go over from our book is just collaborative learning. Okay, so collaborative learning, it's almost self-explanatory, but I'll give this brief definition. It's the ability to work well with other people to find shared solutions to the common problems that we face. Okay, so in life, as we've said, sometimes there are problems that you face, obstacles that you encounter, and a lot of times it helps you to work cooperatively and work well with other people to find common solutions. So if you're a good critical thinker, you also have this quality as well. You're willing and able to be a team player and work well with other people to find shared solutions. This is different from someone who kind of stubbornly refuses all help and assistance, or thinks that they know better than others and refuses to take their counsel or their input or their advice. So I'm sure each one of us probably feels like we're good, intelligent, independent people, and we are, but there's always something that you can learn that is of value from others. Even if you know a lot about a topic, sometimes there are things that you don't know from your own experience that you can only really learn about from other people who've had different experiences. I think there's this old metaphor or something. It's like a kind of one of those children's stories that you're supposed to drive a moral from, but like a bunch of people are all in the presence of an elephant and they're blind, and one person can feel the trunk, one person can feel like the leg, and the other person like the ear. Only by working together will they be able to combine their experiences so that they know exactly what it is, because each one only has access to one part of the bigger picture. So in life, it's sometimes like that. You might be the most quantitatively sharp person, but then you have like a more creative thinker who can add something to your perspective, or vice versa. So it really does help and benefit you to take the best contributions and input from your peers and colleagues, so that you can find these shared solutions as a team, as a group. And even if you are the smartest person in the room, and you very well might be, again, I remind you that sometimes there are things that go beyond just being very, very intelligent. There's also experience and perspective. So I don't think it ever hurts anybody to people and find the value in their advice and their input. So that's one more quality of a good critical thinker. Okay, so we can move now to the next little part of chapter 1. Just have a couple more notes in there to go over. The next thing that is described are what are some of the benefits that come from being a good critical thinker. Like, in other words, what's in it for me? Am I being a good critical thinker just to make everyone else happy? No, it's really for your own benefit more than anything else. But we want to know, what are these benefits? How does it derive back to your own self-interest and to your own advantage? Well, we could speak a lot about this, but there's at least a couple points that I want to focus on from the book. So Anyway, here we go. Benefits of being a good critical thinker. Okay, so one of them is just personal confidence and self-esteem. Okay, so there is even some scientific research to suggest that people with higher degree of cognitive ability and rational thinking ability, it's correlated with lower levels of depression, rage, and low self-esteem. And on the other hand, it's correlated with higher degrees of self-satisfaction, confidence, and contentment. So why would you think that is? If you just even had to give a common sense guess, why do you think that it is people who are better at solving problems, analyzing information, are more confident in themselves, and they're a little bit less depressed and have less anger, rage, higher self-esteem? What is it about being a good critical thinker, in other words, that you believe might make a person feel better about themselves in life overall? What makes a person so confident and self-assured if they're a good critical thinker? Just anything you might have. Let's see what you think. Why would that tend towards feeling better about yourself and being happier overall? And why, on the other hand, would people that are not as reasonable, not as competent at evaluating information suffer from more rage, depression, lower self-esteem? What is it that makes a good critical thinker confident and self-assured? Imagine that. Question for you. Why do you think so? It's not like it's something where you have to give like some technical definition. It's just it's a conversation, right? So what do you think? Why would good critical thinkers be confident with strong self-esteem? Okay, so Brenda, they have facts and belief of what they're saying so they can back up their claims without an issue. That's one thing. You have the courage and the confidence of knowing that your viewpoints are based on something and that they're not just random and baseless or frivolous. That's one thing. Anybody else have thoughts along the same lines? We've talked about solving problems. I thought someone might mention that because that's one of the ones that really jumps out at me. If you're a good critical thinker, then you're not so afraid of the problems that you face in life because you don't get so easily overwhelmed and frustrated by them. See, when you're not good at solving problems and you have a hard time figuring out why things are happening or what you should do about them, then you always have to be like phoning a friend, seeking out advice, and you're always at a loss. But when you're a good critical thinker, you feel prepared and you feel equipped to deal with whatever strange or difficult obstacles may face you in life. There's also the aspect of having a good reputation. I mean, sure, but Dylan, I mean, that's a little bit derivative of how other people see you. Self-esteem by itself, you would think, comes from within. But sure enough, I mean, it does meet with social respectability, right? People respect and honor others who can justify their views and have something to say to back themselves up. Micah, they can answer more questions, solve problems that can make someone overthink, which lead to anxiety. Yeah, so they find solutions, they know answers to problems, whereas other people are searching for those solutions and answers and feeling at a loss. Danny, good thinkers could probably think logically in a certain situation. Right, imagine you're in an emergency situation and somebody has to be composed, rational, and deliberate about what to do. That person's going to feel a little more calm and at ease than everyone else who's panicking and worried and looking to them for advice. So when things don't go as well as you would like, or when you have to find a solution to either a small little problem or a big one, you'd like to have the tools intellectually to do that well. Good critical thinkers are good at dealing with such situations without fear, without getting overwhelmed or thrown into a depression or rage. And you know, poor critical thinkers are the ones that have to rely on their better critical thinking friends. Wouldn't you like to be the kind of person who gets the call from others seeking advice than to be the one who has to keep reaching out to other people saying, what should I do? I can't figure it out. Give me some wise advice. So we can always improve, but being a good critical thinker is to your benefit in that way. Nobody wants to feel overwhelmed, pressed, and at a loss when tough decisions or actions, complex decisions, complex problems face us. Okay, so that's one. It helps with self-esteem and personal confidence. And there's some scientific evidence to support that. If I read it from the book, here's what was mentioned in the book. Effective critical thinking skills appear to be positively correlated to healthy self-esteem. Healthy self-esteem emerges from effectiveness in problem solving and success in achieving your goals. The task of sorting out your self-worth from a false sense of self-esteem requires critical thinking. Healthy self-esteem is not the same as arrogant pride or always put your own interests first. People with low self-esteem are more vulnerable to manipulation. They experience more depression, irritability, anxiety, fatigue, nightmares, withdrawal from others, nervous laughter, emotional tension. Good critical thinking skills are essential in exercising your powers of decision-making. And so, continuing on from there, just another sort of summary statement of the same thing we've talked about. Okay, so we move on to the next benefit of good critical thinkers. Another of the benefits is that it helps you to develop a rational plan of life. Developing a rational life plan. Okay, so each one of us is living a human life. You know, my life, I'm living it. Your life, you're living it. So each one of us is a human being living a human life, and we all, I think, want our lives to go well. I don't know if I've ever met anybody who said, I don't want my life to go well, or I don't care, it could go well or anything, and it just doesn't matter to me. I think you're not neutral on this. You want your life to go better rather than worse. But for it to go well, for your life to go well the way you want, you're going to have to make plans towards the achievement of different goals that you have, right? And one thing that good critical thinkers are good at, among other things, is that they're good at developing and successfully executing on plans. Because critical thinkers are able to determine what it is that they want, and then to determine what all the goals that they will have to achieve on the way to those outcomes are. So not only do they know, for example, oh, I want to be rich, but like, what are the steps that you would have to take to get to be rich? Like, okay, I must have a career. If I'm going to have a career, I'm going to have some kind of education. And if I'm going to have education, I'm going to have to pick a major. And then all the way down to like the schedule that I'm going to have for a given semester. And then we get down into the details of your work habits in a given week or in a given day. So we're all making decisions all the time toward the advancement of our goals in life. And if you're a good critical thinker, you know what most effective plans would be towards the achievement of these goals. You're also able to weigh in the balance what your skills, abilities, and talents are to direct you toward the big goals that you have. So you'd be very lucky in life if everything worked out the way you wanted and you never had to plan for it, like everything just fell into place for you. Most all of us, to have success, we have to plan for success and we have to steer ourselves towards that outcome. So if you're a good critical thinker, you're a very good captain of this ship that you're steering in life, your own life. You're able to direct it towards the results that you want, and you know what all of the little benchmarks and sub-goals are on the path to those achievements, right? If I'm sitting here as a professor, which I am, this didn't just happen for no reason. I didn't just wake up one day like, how did this happen? I never planned for any of this. I planned for each step along the way. And a good critical thinker is that kind of person, not just haphazardly floating through life like a leaf in the wind, hoping that some external forces lead them somehow to a good result. So good critical thinkers are good at planning, and that's another of the big benefits. You want to be the kind of person who can make effective and good plans for your own success. Okay? And then one more I'll go into from the book, being a good citizen in a democracy. Okay, so one more good quality that critical thinkers have is that they're good citizens in a democratic system of government. To understand why, let's focus on this. What is the nature of democracy? What makes a system of government a democratic system instead of, let's say, some other type of form of social organization? What is the defining hallmark feature of democracy? We're all members of a democracy here, I guess, as United States citizens. So what is the basis or nature, the essential ingredient of being in a democracy? What's a democracy? What's the definition? Do you think? No? let's see. I mean, we live in one, so reasoning backwards from that. The power is in the people. Okay, very good, Harry. Yes, that's true. Even the word democracy, the first part comes from demos, from Old Greek, meaning people. So it does literally mean a government of and for the people. Brenda, you say the ability to work together in order to come to a conclusion for the better of everyone. Yes, but you could say something like that in any form of government. Imagine that people live in an oligarchy or an aristocracy or even a monarchy. You could imagine that they want to work together for the betterment of everyone. Not to say your comment is wrong, but I want to emphasize one part of democracy that's specific to it. In democracy, and we should all be kind of familiar with this because of our recent past few months. In a democracy, one of the core defining features is that there have to be what? I'm fishing around for this one very important central piece of democracy. We said it's about the people. Maybe, Harry, you can expand on that. The people doing what? How is it a government for the people? There's a specific mechanism that makes sure that it is. And I'm talking about what? Only in the democracy do you have, let's hear it. Voting, very good, yes, elections. In a democratic form of government, people have power because we appoint those that are holding office through the process of democratic elections. That's why it's not a monarchy where it's like the next person who rules is just the son or whatever of the previous king. It's not, like a dictatorship where maybe a very powerful military general overthrew the government and then just rules with the iron fist and doesn't allow power to be taken away. It's a democratic system, and it's a government for the people because the people can vote in elections. So democracy, the hallmark, the core defining feature of it is democratic elections. So now coming back to this point, one of the benefits of being a good critical thinker is that it makes you a better citizen in a democracy. So why is it that a good critical thinker is a better participating citizen? Because we do our civic duty as citizens. Well, one of the ways is jury duty, but the main thing is when we vote in elections. When we participate in elections, then we give our contribution, our input as to how we think the leadership or direction of the country should go. So you're only going to be able to cast wise votes if you're a good critical thinker. Because what is voting? It's making a decision about who had the better argument or which position or platform was better for your well-being and the well-being of your community. So how can you really weigh the arguments that are being given by two candidates or that are being given on either side, like Prop 22, yes versus no? You have to be able to comprehend the arguments for both, and then you have to be able to cast a vote that reflects your best interests. So wise voters are good critical thinkers. And to the extent that critical thinkers carefully weigh arguments and evidence and make reasonable decisions based on them, they are more wise with their voting choices, and that's to the benefit of everybody in a democracy. Here I'll read off the words of the editor. They say, critical thinking skills are essential in a democracy. Democracy literally means rule by the people. It's a form of government in which the highest power in the state is invested in the people and exercised directly by them. As citizens of a democracy, we have an obligation to be well informed about policies and issues so that we can effectively participate. Thomas Jefferson, one of our founders, said, in a Republican nation, Republican in the sense of a republic, not in the modern sense of Republican and Democrat, but anyway, in a Republican nation whose citizens are led by reason and persuasion and not by force, the art of reasoning becomes of the first importance. And then he talks about how sometimes when people were not well informed, they allowed corruption to occur, or they made poor decisions that undermined the status quo. Now, if you lived in a totalitarian dictatorship, where dissent could just be crushed, and you could be like imprisoned for disagreeing with something the government said, then I guess your critical thinking ability wouldn't be rewarded as much, because if you went out and said, this is wrong and I don't agree with our policies, then in that case you could perhaps be, your dissent could be crushed overwhelmingly by like the force of a totalitarian system. But we do live in a democracy, so we should honor and value and cherish the freedoms that we have to express our voice, to vote, and to advocate for our prerogatives and our policy positions. Okay, so it's all about voting. Long story short, good critical thinkers are better and wiser with the vote, but I wanted to expand on it just a little bit. Okay, so we're done with the benefits of being a good critical thinker, and the next part of notes from chapter 1 deals with what it calls barriers or obstacles to being a good critical thinker. There's some kind of innate built-in psychological defense mechanisms that a lot of us can fall back on. You can think of them as sort of mental habits that we've developed over the course of life. And sometimes these prevent us from being the good critical thinkers that we want to be. A big part of the reason that we have these barriers within is because we hate being wrong. We hate changing our mind. We hate thinking that somebody knew better than us or whatever. And so sometimes these tendencies inside stand in the way of us being good critical thinkers. But we want to be able to point out what those barriers are so that we can counteract them and overcome them in our own behavior. First, though, I maybe jumped ahead just a moment too soon. We are going to talk about those barriers to critical thinking. But one thing happens in the notes just before that, and that's the 3 stages of the critical thinking process. So let me tell you about that. Okay, so the textbook says that if you like, you can sort of break the process of critical thinking down into 3 discrete stages. So let's try and figure out what those are. First, there is experience, then interpretation, and then analysis. And let's make sure not to be confused. The 3 stages of cognitive development, that's a different analysis of a process broken down into 3 stages. And these are the 3 stages of critical thinking. I've noticed in the past sometimes students will be confused as to which was which. But this is a different 3-part process. Cognitive development occurs throughout your life. And this can be focused on even just a single event or issue. But let's talk about them. Okay, so first is the experience stage. At the experience first stage of critical thinking, a person merely tries to describe what happened, but they don't yet try and understand or explain why it happened or how it happened. So this is just kind of like the what of the critical thinking process. One describes what happened, without trying to explain why or how it happened. Okay, so let me just give some random examples. Like perhaps a person interviews for a job and they didn't get the job. So they could say of their experience just that basic fact. I applied, I interviewed, and I did not get the job. Okay, so that's just what happened. But notice that at this point, we're just laying out what it was. We're not yet saying, why though? Why didn't I get it? Or why didn't the person hire me? How did I manage to not get this job that I interviewed for? At the experience stage, you just provide what the experience was. In a lot of cases, it's your experience. In other cases, it just might be an event that happened in the world. Like you could say, Trump lost the election. That's just what happened. And notice that in that way of putting it, I'm only saying what it was. I'm not yet trying to explain why didn't he win or how did he lose, okay? But as a good critical thinker, you want to move beyond merely just what the experience was to getting some kind of interpretation of why, okay? Because critical thinkers don't want to just say, hey, stuff is happening. Who knows why? They want to know why, because if something happened and you think it was a good thing, you'd like to know why it happened so that, or how it happened, so you can repeat it and make it happen again. And if something happened and it was not good, and you're like, I don't want that to ever happen again, then you also want to know why or how that bad thing happened so that you can avoid it or prevent it in the future, okay? So knowledge is power. At least you have to come up with some reason or interpretation. So that's the second stage. Now, one does try to explain why or how the experience happened. Okay. Now, before I mention the third stage here, let me say a few more pieces of info about this. Sometimes your first interpretation of why something happened can be clouded by bias or by the heat of the moment or your emotion. So like say you didn't get the job and that's just what happened. And now you're still kind of pissed about it. So you're like, why didn't I get it? Okay, probably because, I don't know, the boss that interviewed me, they're so superficial. They just didn't like my tie. I mean, I probably shouldn't have worn the pink polka dot tie. I thought it was just a fun item, but maybe that was a little too loud and they didn't like me after that. So I think that's why I didn't get this job. What, the tie? Come on, this was a terrible decision. No, not fair. Okay, like that's one example. Here's another one. You get a traffic ticket. That's just what it was. Now you're interpreting it and you're thinking back, man, I did not need this traffic ticket. You know what, this cop probably just, he had a quota to fill and he was ready to write a ticket for anybody that came down the interstate. He saw me going a little faster than the speed limit and that's why I got the ticket. It's all because he just, he's trying to get as many tickets written today as possible. So what I'm telling you is sometimes at first, when you reflect on an experience, especially if it's one that you do not like, you can sometimes give a self-serving or biased interpretation. Even if it's a good thing, sometimes you'll award yourself more credit than you deserve. I don't know, she said yes, you proposed to someone, and you're like, I'm just the best person in the world, that's why it happened, or something, but maybe that's a little bit too generous towards yourself. So anyway, experience gives way to interpretation, but finally we get to analysis. With analysis, here's the thing, we go back and we revisit the earlier interpretation, and we just give ourselves a chance to reconsider whether it's the right one, or is there a better interpretation that's more accurate. So that's an analysis. One considers whether their previous interpretation was correct, or is there a better alternative interpretation. One considers whether their previous interpretation is correct, or, and that's going to get a little low on the board, but okay, or if there is a better interpretation. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. You can hear me say it, and I'll say it again. Analysis. One considers whether their previous interpretation is actually correct, or is there a better, different interpretation. So, girlfriend broke up with me. First thought, she's just terrible. This whole time, she's not who I thought she was. She's a bad person. I'm the greatest person. She just wanted to be cruel. That's why she broke up with me. Then you gain some time and space. You calm down a little bit. You get some distance from the original loss. And you think about it twice. And you're like, well, at first it was all me blaming her. But now as I look back on it, I realized that I could have acted differently. I forgot her birthday. I insulted her family that one time, and she really didn't like that. So even though I wasn't thinking about that at first, maybe those are the real reasons that she left me, So you give yourself a more fair-minded and rational ability to reconsider. Now, sometimes you just have really good first instincts, and your first interpretation is correct, and it's not biased. That's okay. But you still owe it to yourself to have a second look and a second consideration. Oftentimes, it's only in the light of reconsideration that happens later that your judgments actually become clearer and more sharp. Because in the heat of the moment or in the immediate aftermath of an event, sometimes we don't have the full information we need or the perspective that we need to come up with the right explanation as to why. So this is the full process of critical thinking, and it can be applied to any kind of experience at all. Sometimes it's your own, and sometimes it's an experience that you just observe. Biden won the election. That's just what happened. Why did it happen? I don't know. You could have initially thought everybody was just afraid of Trump's response to the coronavirus. Maybe you reflect on it a little bit more after that and you think of a more broad interpretation that includes more factors. Just random example. Okay, so 3 phases or stages of critical thinking. Here's one. My bike got stolen. This is a real story. I don't know if I mentioned it before, but my bike got stolen from my own balcony. And my first thought was, maybe I'm living in a really bad neighborhood where people just steal. But I thought about it some more, and it's like, actually, this is a pretty good neighborhood. The real reason had more to do with me not locking it. So at first I'm blaming everybody else. Now I'm taking a little bit more responsibility. That's just one example, perhaps. Okay, got a bad grade. Why? Terrible teacher. This person can't teach. Then you speak to your classmates, and they're all like, yeah, that was pretty easy. We got a good grade. So now you're like, well, maybe it's more to do with my study or preparation for the exam on this case. Okay, so just random examples. And now we're done with that. So 3 stages of the critical thinking process, guys. Just adding that to the notes. Okay, and so the last thing, as I was hinting before, is that the textbook mentions a range of different barriers or obstacles to being a good critical thinker. So let me just go over some of these. So these are like bad habits that we kind of want to try and improve on or move past, but you're not alone. We all have these tendencies and these habits, and we kind of have to constantly self-monitor and overcome these predispositions. One of them is just avoidance. And that is defined as avoiding people and information that conflict with your own views. Okay, so it's kind of like only keeping company with like-minded people or with friendly sources of information sources that reinforce the things you already believe, but deliberately avoiding contrary information and contrary opinion. So it would be better for anybody to engage with people and ideas that are outside of their own circle of belief and agreement. Even if you're not going to ultimately agree with the people who are on another side of an issue or perspective from you, it's never a bad thing to at least know where other people are coming from. So hearing people out, listening to them, engaging with them is a lot better than simply cutting off all the people who don't believe or think the same exact things that you do. If you do that also, and you avoid people who don't agree, you're cutting yourself off from a whole bunch of possible relationships and experiences that you otherwise could have had, because in this big world we live in, not everybody agrees on stuff. There's a lot of diversity of opinion and different belief systems, different ways of life, etc. So avoidance is really only to your own detriment, even though sometimes, of course, you don't feel so friendly with people or ideas that are different from your own. But no one's ever been hurt by information. So no one's ever been hurt by just learning what other people think or hearing their ideas out. So the better policy as a good critical thinker is to not seek to avoid, but rather to engage and at least have a productive meeting of the minds or exchange of ideas. Another one is simply just anger. Okay, so anger is easy to explain, but it's just instead of really analyzing an opposing view, you get mad at the person for even presenting the view. Okay, so another common obstacle to critical thinking is the reaction of anger to the presentation of contrary ideas. Sometimes if someone says, hey, I don't agree with you about that, here's my point of view, that triggers anger in the other party. Like, don't say that to me, you can't say that to me, you're wrong, now I'm mad. But it's not a good idea to get mad. When you start, raising your voice, insulting people, threatening them even, even worse, it doesn't show that you have the better argument, right? So if you and another person are engaged in debate or discussion, and one of the persons starts pounding their fists on the table being like, no, and they're getting mad, it's like they've already lost the argument in a way, because if they really had the stronger position with better evidence, then they should be able to calmly and rationally list their argument for people to consider. If anything, it undermines your credibility, because getting mad makes it seem like you don't have any reasons to give. All you can do is just yell, insult, and pound your fist. And that usually is the person that doesn't have the confidence to actually clearly state an argument based on evidence. So not only does anger not really help you, but it also kind of, in a way, it's to your disadvantage. I mean, it makes other people think this person is just angry, irritable, salty, whatever, and they don't really want to hear anyone else's ideas. So how can I really take them seriously? Okay, it's not a good way to make friends either, or lasting relationships and bonds. And the other problem with anger is, do you really want to carry anger around with you just because other people don't agree? If that's the case, you're going to live your whole life being quite angry all the time, because in this big world, I guarantee you there's going to be a whole number of people that don't agree with something that you believe, no matter who you are. So you can either just understand that people have different opinions and we should all debate and discuss them, or you can live your life as an angry person, and that's not good for you or for anyone else. So it's another barrier to good critical thinking, but unfortunately that's a habit that many people develop. Okay? So we're keeping going. We have a couple more of these. Another of the barriers to good critical thinking are what we call cliches. Now, cliches, when they're referred to as a part of language, are these overused common sayings that seek to pretty much shut down further dialogue or further critical discussion. So these are overused one-liner phrases that seek to end critical discussion. And we all know cliches when we hear them, right? So suppose that you're debating a point with another person on the opposite side. Let it be that it was global warming or something, and one person says, here's all the evidence of global warming, and the other guy says, no. Finally, suppose that one party to the discussion says this little cliche, and you've heard phrases like this. The meaning they carry is pretty much, let's just stop debating this, let's move on, or let's drop it. So it's a phrase like, to each his own, or agree to disagree, or even things like this, whatever. In all those cases, what you're really saying, decode the meaning behind that. It means, let us not engage in further discussion on the point, and let's move on to a different topic. Now, to be fair, sometimes you reach the end of the line in a conversation and you have nothing further to say. So sometimes at that point, maybe it's reasonable to say, you know what, to each their own. But the problem is that I think people actually resort to the cliches much earlier in the conversation by habit. And so people just, at the first sight that there might be a disagreement, someone's like, oh, whatever, it is what it is. Everyone's got an opinion. That's the way the cookie crumbles, etc. And they just say a cliche like that. If that's your habit and you just do that as a default, then after a while, you start just dipping out of every conversation early, and you never pursue anything through to like a logical outcome or a rational debate. So we should use cliches at times, but not so often. I think of it as like something like salt. It's a good seasoning, but if you put too much, it spoils the taste of the meal. So we should not overuse these cliches. But unfortunately, they're quite common, and sometimes you have to redirect a person to the conversation. Like, oh, that's a cliche. I mean, but what do you really think? Okay, cliches. You guys understand? Example given. It is what it is. To each their own. Agree to disagree. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so those are cliches. Another quality, or barrier rather, towards good critical thinking. Okay, now there's also denial. That is when one simply denies alternative ideas rather than analyzing them. Okay, so denial is slightly different from avoidance, because with avoidance, you won't even let yourself see the different information or the different people who disagree. With denial, you might become exposed to those alternative ideas, but you flatly deny them before even thinking about them. So it's like someone who says, no way, global warming's fake. I don't even have to look at the evidence, or even if I do look at it, I'm going to discount each piece, no matter how credible it might be. So you have to always give your contrary point of view or your opponent at least a chance to persuade you. If you commit to denying everything that someone else says, then you're not really going to have any kind of productive exchange of information. There's also ignorance, and the textbook refers to this in the way of like willful ignorance, so ignorance that you do deliberately. So this is when you deliberately choose to stay uninformed about something so that you don't have to do anything about it. Okay, when you deliberately choose to stay uninformed in order to avoid making a choice or taking a position, taking an action. Suppose that someone says, how are you going to vote on Prop 22? And the response given is, well, I really can't tell you because I'm totally ignorant of the issue. I haven't studied any of the literature about pro or con on Prop 22, so I really can't tell you how I would vote. Now, what's the problem with that appeal to ignorance? Well, the problem is that the information is clearly available to the public if you just want to go and simply seek it out. At any point, we all have a Google search engine, and today in the year 2021, it's harder to profess ignorance on a whole range of topics than at any previous time because the information's all out there in the public domain. So it's not like you couldn't get it, just choosing not to look at it and then using that as a basis to say, I'm not going to do anything. So we shouldn't, like the ostrich, bury our head in the sand and say, hey, I don't know anything, see no evil, hear no evil, and I just can't make a decision. You should remain informed. Inform yourself on issues of the day so that you have a point of view and a position on them. Don't be afraid to take a position because that's just part of being a human that commits to their views based on good evidence. Okay, let's see. And there's just a couple more of these barriers that we can go over. And we're getting close to the end of class, but I want to just get as much of the material out there as I can before we close. So another barrier to good critical thinking is conformity. This is a word that maybe some of you know or you've heard before, but conformity is basically when you try to take on the viewpoint of the majority or what you think is popular so that you can fit in, so that you don't stand out like as a loner or stand out from the crowd. So that is one adopts the majority or popular view to fit in and avoid standing out. Now, I understand that nobody wants to be isolated, excluded, left out, and all of that. And that's normal because we're social animals, we're herd animals, so we want to be part of the pack, we want to be part of the group, that's fine. But the problem is, you shouldn't just determine what you believe simply on the basis that that's what most people believe, or that's what popular viewpoint is. Sometimes, of course, the majority could be wrong. And if you would have followed the majority trend of opinion during the time of slavery, then you would have been against the abolition of slavery, or you might have been against the right of women to vote or something in earlier parts of United States history. So the prevailing winds of popular or majority opinion change and shift, and you owe it to yourself to think independently. That doesn't mean that the majority is always wrong either. Sometimes they have, and in many cases have, reasonable and fair-minded opinions. But if they do, you should think it through on your own and not just assign your belief to that merely because it's popular. You've probably heard a lot of, we've said cliches, but cliches like this from your parents. Like, if all your friends jumped off a bridge, would you do the same? That's kind of a wise counsel to you not to be overly conformist in the way that you act. And we also see this sometimes in behavior like fashion and music trends or film, whatever. So think for yourself, be a unique individual. You're the only one of you that there is. So, you know, you can enjoy your individualism. That doesn't mean that you can't partake in the crowd or be part of the crowd, but you shouldn't just form your beliefs based on what everyone else thinks. Sometimes they're wrong. Okay, and one more of the barriers is struggling. Struggling is a person endlessly debates what position or action to take, and they never reach a conclusion. Okay, so sometimes people basically have a hard time making up their mind, and they flip-flop and they waver back and forth and never really reach an ultimate outcome. Say that you asked a person, how are you going to vote on this proposition? And they say, you know what, I'm struggling with that choice. I think both of the sides of the argument are reasonable, so I'm just deliberating, and it's a hard call. I'm struggling with it. You're gonna have to check with me later. So you check with them day before the election, and they're like, I'm still struggling. I gotta really choose, but it's tough. Then after the election, you say, what did you end up doing? Say, you know, I just never voted. I was struggling to the very end, and I could never actually get a correct or a credible decision made. If that's the case, the person wasted a lot of intellectual labor deliberating back and forth and never come to a conclusion. It is reasonable to struggle in some limited way, because no one can just make a snap decision without thinking about the basis or the factors underlying it. But if you do this indefinitely with no end, then you never get to the result, which is the whole goal of reflection and critical thought, to come to a conclusion. So deliberate, debate, discuss, but don't do that forever. Ultimately, you got to reach some kind of conclusion. Jay, you say, is there a Discord? I'm not 100% sure, but you'll be able to find out, I'm sure, with some of your classmates if you guys are in touch through email or anything else. So that's struggling. Now, there are like a few leftover terms, just a grab bag of extra terms at the end. I'd like to just mention them in passing very briefly, and I can send you some more detailed notes on them in the message that I'm going to deliver after class. But there's a couple forms of narrow-mindedness, which are also within the broad category of barriers to critical thinking. One of them is egocentrism. That's thinking that you're better than all others, smarter than them, and having a low degree of respect for other people's views. Basically being self-centered and egotistical. That's to your disadvantage, because if you're egotistical, self-centered, not only do you have an overinflated estimate of yourself, which is inaccurate, and that's going to poorly prepare you for some things that you could get into, but you're also easily manipulated because you're subject to exploitation through flattery and through ingratiating someone to you in that way. So you want to have an honest appreciation of what your limitations are so that you can improve on them. And if you're egocentric, you're going to have an overinflated estimate of yourself as compared with others. Plus, people don't usually respect and honor those that are egocentric, because it doesn't seem like you value others equally to yourself. There's also ethnocentrism, which is the unjustified belief in the superiority of your race, group, or culture. That would be like white supremacy and other forms of bigotry that place one's own group at some kind of pinnacle in a hierarchy above others. And clearly that's unscientific. There's no genetic or behavioral basis at all for thinking that the phenotypical traits involving your skin color, eye color, or anything else have a bearing on your moral or intellectual capacities. So ethnocentrism is like just racist bigotry expressed through like supremacist thinking. And that's another major obstacle to correct critical thinking. If you thought that way, then you wouldn't have a proper sense of the value and contribution of people from other walks of life and from other races and so on. And you'd be disrespectful to them as well. You'd also cut yourself off from a wealth of experience from people outside of your own in-group. So there's ethnocentrism, egocentrism, and a couple of other words that I want to talk about, but I will mention them in the follow-up message that I'll send. So there's just like 2 more definitions that I'm going to put in that note that I'll send tonight. Other than that, guys, next week on Wednesday when we resume, because we're going to have a long weekend for the holiday, we'll have our quiz on Chapter 8 and 1. So pay attention to your titanium announcements, and I'll be in touch with you. There'll be plenty of detail about the first quiz, and I'll also send around the answer key for the first homework this weekend so that you'll know how you did on it. And you can also request your score from me by email once I post the answer key. Okay, guys, so letting you go. Thanks again for all of your attendance and hard work so far in the semester. have a great weekend. Enjoy the little time off. And if you need anything, please feel free to email me, and I'll be in touch. So thanks, guys, and I'll see you soon. Okay, bye-bye.